probably isn't intentional, but this is my secret theory. As somebody who loves unreliable narrators, I always take it that all first-person narrators are unreliable. For instance, I always took it that the world beyond Panem was relatively stable. In fact, maybe Snow entertains the likes of people such as King Harold in Norway or Xi Jinping for tea on Saturdays. But because Katniss has to survive, she doesn't question the propaganda that Panem came out of a natural crisis, as does everybody else. That's why I feel like Bella in Twilight isn't a one-note character. Marizo, I feel like she has or had a character. But because she's unreliable and her boyfriend is brainwashing her, intentionally or not, she had one, but he robbed it away. It's why she views Leaf as bad, because she's sterile or believes that Jake was naming her daughter after the Loch Ness Monster and not the fact that he made her a child bride a bad thing. I feel like the reasoning is because Bella is being groomed to be part of a cult of people who fight for immortality. To do this, they drink blood and kill people. Only Edward's chapter drinks the blood of animals, which is why other vampires find it weird. The reason why vampires exist is because Bella is trying to incrementalize it to keep from going insane. She doesn't want to admit she's stuck in the cult she can't escape, so she lies to herself and says she's a vampire or her families are one, too. Let me put it this way, Bella is a teenage girl, and as a teenage girl, she is dramatic. She did experience some tragedy, so she is susceptible to be in a cult. On the first day of school, she meets Edward, who looks 17 but is old-fashioned and likely in his 30s or 40s, but just looks like a 17-year-old boy. Heck, he could even look like he's in his 20s, but because television makes us think all high school students look like adults, she and nobody else question the thing. Edward isn't really 17, he's part of a cult, and he's an old man looking to recruit young girls. So he stalks her and eventually they start dating. As for the car accident, he stages the whole thing. Same goes for Bella's mental shield. Bella doesn't really have mental shields. They just play themselves off like she does, so she thinks she's in the cult. It all comes off as a story, since Bella is writing it as such. For all we know, the fourth scene could have been drugs, or the sparkles could just be body paint or a trick with the light. As for some powers, it could just be that placebo effect is in the works. Jacob is just a guy who is trying to get Bella out of the cult, but she sees him as annoying as a result. He isn't a werewolf, he's just an extraordinarily buff guy who plays himself off as such. Bella just writes him as a wolf. do you explain to Bolshoi they are the Vatican of the cows? They try to enforce rules, but for whatever reason, Edward's chapter is fundamentalist. Since one complaint towards the Bolshoi is they seem bad, but they have a point. How do they try to keep vampires from being spotted by humans by making them clean up their messes? How evil, but that's because unreliable narrator once again still views them as such. For all we know, they could be the police who keep trying to save Bella, but Bella doesn't want their help. Shining is about the never-ending cycle of good and evil. My theory behind this is Stanley Kubrick juxtaposes how evil we can be, genocide, with how creative we can be, animation, cartoons, space travel. Danny and Wendy are cartoon characters and Jack is genocide. Other evil symbolism is obviously alcoholism and rage. I think the point of the movie The Shining is that evil thwarts good and good is based on evil. Genocide gave way to creativity and creativity is broken by evil and the cycle continues throughout history. It never ends and we're trapped in that maze. Town in Clash of Clans is communist. I was thinking about how the villagers and troops in Cock do not seem to work, eat or buy thing outside of battle, and then I realized it must be because of communism. The villagers wander around all day, and the collectors of gold and elixir are automated. Instead of the villagers and troops paying you, the government taxes, you are the one that buys troops or gives out rations. The builders, the only workers in your socialist society, do not demand tens of millions of gold for a job that is too much for one person. The money is split between every villager. All the other villagers appear to be female because the males, along with some females like the archers and witches, are forced to become troops. Aside from builders' huts, there is no private property and every villager lives in the town hall. In the world without human intervention, Cadabra would run a slave trade. Okay, so imagine a world where Pokemon are real, but humans are not. Pokemon run free, likely in small herds or colonies of similar types. Pokemon would likely still evolve by level up as they gain experience growing older or hunting or whatever else they would just naturally do. This makes evolved Pokemon fairly common, but excludes certain Pokemon from the list. Those that evolve by means other than level up. Pokemon that evolve by stones could probably exist. Evolutionary stones are probably found in the world, and I'm pretty sure moonstones canonically fall from the sky in the Johto games at that one clever event in Mount moon that nobody has ever seen. Pokemon that evolved by friendship could probably form friendships among other Pokemon and evolve that way. This leaves trait evolutions, which are not likely to happen naturally. Enter Kadabra, who would likely exist despite Saber not learning any offensive moves, but who could not evolve due to lack of trainers to trade it. Now, here I'm going to make a few assumptions. First, the Pokedex entry for Alakazam. I know Pokedex entries are far from reliable, but one sticks out to me here. That Alakazam has an IQ of 5,000. This is quite obviously an exaggeration, but by how far I'd argue that, even if this is a tremendous exaggeration, there's a fair case to be made for Alakazam being above human intelligence. Thus, I think it's pretty fair to put Kadabra at roughly human intelligence. As creatures of human intelligence, it isn't too much of a stretch to say that they would develop a Kadabra/Abra society, including language, economy, domestication of less intelligent creatures, etc. Included in this list, however, is slavery. In a world where powerful creatures like Machoke appear regularly, and over whom Kadabra has a serious intelligence/type advantage, Kadabra would probably enslave Machoke to do physical labor. And if they ever gave that Machoke to another Kadabra or traded it for another Pokemon slave, Machoke would evolve into Machamp. Kadabra, being human-like in this scenario, would realize that this is a pattern and would seek to reproduce it in other Pokemon, including Graveler and other Kadabra. This leads to Alakazam and Golem becoming prevalent in the wild. Therefore, I believe that Kadabra/Alakazam would likely perfect the process over years of trial and error, and would thus create an extensive slave trade to develop Alakazam society and introduce Golem and Machamp into the world. Then, one day, Alakazam Lincoln would come along and free the Machamp slaves, inspiring John Weavile Booth to assassinate him at the Pokemon contest. Edit U/Skitterleaper brings up an interesting point about the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon canon. I've been giving it some thought through the day, and I've decided to reject the canon for a few reasons. The first reason is the obvious presence of humans. I'm most familiar with the first two games, so I'll discuss those primarily. So, in these two games, the player character is a human that turned into a Pokemon. The first game mentions another human as well, who is actually the Jengar in that game. In both games, there are plot lines that mention involvement with the humans of the world, manifesting in the Ninetales and Grovyle plots. In addition, there's one Pokemon in the main game canon that is explicitly stated to be human-made, that being cast form. Cast form appears throughout both games and is fairly common, which seems to indicate pretty substantial human involvement. Considering these, it seems that the Mystery Dungeon canon should have fairly little bearing on this hypothetical scenario. The second reason is that, in the PMD canon, all Pokemon seem to have the same intelligence. They're all capable of speech, and besides there are dummies just lying around that can raise IQ. Alakazam is still explicitly stated to be the smartest, but that's more of a testament to that single Alakazam. Some Pokemon should likely not be able to speak or even has no mouth or telepathy. Voltorb has no mouth, etc. And yet they can in PMD canon. It kind of trivializes the relative intelligence canon of Pokemon. All being said, you could consider that the PMD canon dismisses this theory, but I happen to disagree. We'll just have to wait for the inevitable Gritty Nat Geo series to prove one side right. Wonderland Disney 1951 is a post-war dystopia. We all know Alice in Wonderland by now. This theory has to do with the Disney animated movie, not the novel or any of the live-action movies. Anyway, my theory about Alice in Wonderland, let's call it the War of the Suit. When Alice gets to Wonderland, it seems to be quite sparsely populated, and of the inhabitants she does meet, very few are human. We see many of the signs of magical influence as she works her way through Wonderland. Animals walk, talk, and dress like people. Inanimate objects come to life and even partly fuse with living things to become strange, twisted entities. This is all pretty on par with the magic in other Disney movies. However, there is one, or rather three, thing that is conspicuously absent when Alice finally finds herself in the royal gardens. She finds herself confronted by the violent and clearly deranged Queen of Hearts. She is surrounded by playing card servants and soldiers of all four suits, yet we never see the royalty of the diamonds, clubs, or spades, despite the hearts holding all four suits. And now the theory Wonderland is an actual place, and just a few generations before Alice literally fell into it, they experienced a massive civil war that left Wonderland barely inhabited. Whether Wonderland was divided into four kingdoms, or the four suits ruled jointly, we may never know. But at some point, the four royal suits went to war, a war which would end with the use of magical weapons of mass destruction, and a Wonderland forever altered by magical contamination the way radiation from nukes might mutate the life in our world. Either the forests were never targeted, or the weapons were designed for animal life, as plants seem to only be mildly affected where living things have had their very nature altered. Animals have become people, and objects have become animals. To why so few people seem to live in Wonderland, the resulting mental instability is quite apparent with this result of the war. Populations were reduced to such levels that inbreeding was immediately necessary, which resulted in the universal madness that we see in every sentient being in Wonderland. This is especially true with the hearts. Clearly, the hearts were the victors in the war of the suit. They defeated the other three and absorbed their card armies into their own. Inbreeding was likely already happening among the Hearts royalty before the war, leaving them aggressive and short-tempered. They may have even started the war. We don't know. But clearly, violence and bloodthirst became very pronounced in this royal family. So there you have it. Wonderland is less than nonsensical dreams of an imaginative and bored girl, and more post-war dystopia. Maui hypnotized Moana in order to steal her boat. In the movie Moana, the character Maui is described as a demigod with many different powers. I believe one of his powers is the power of hypnosis, which he uses on Moana during the You're Welcome scene. Before Maui attempts to hypnotize Moana, he does what's called a suggestibility test. This is something hypnotists do to gauge how easily a person can be hypnotized. In this case, Maui gives Moana the suggestion I believe you were trying to say is thank you, and when she responds to his suggestion by saying thank you, he gives a snide look because he knows she is suggestible and can easily be hypnotized by him. At the 25-second mark, he does his first induction attempt by spinning her around and yanking on her arm. This is called an arm pull induction, and it's a very popular type of shock induction used by hypnotists. However, it appears Moana resists the arm pull induction as she still is holding up her oar defensively, showing she isn't in a hypnotic trance yet. Maui continues with the song, lowering Moana's defenses so the next induction attempt won't be resisted. You can see at 1:30 she starts to lower her defenses, and the smile begins to appear on her face. At 2:04 he does his second induction attempt, a butterfly induction, and this time it works. Moana is completely hypnotized and put into trance. Following the butterfly induction, Moana willingly hands Maui the oar she had previously been using to defend herself and begins following behind him in mindless state. This is also the point in the scene where she imagines the rocks are fruit as Maui hands them to her. Now that Moana is hypnotized, Maui announces it's time for him to go and explains he's going to steal her boat. But Moana is so hypnotized at this point she doesn't seem to care and just bobs her head around with a big goofy smile. It isn't until she's thrown into the cave that she snaps out of trance and realizes what happened. The aim of Pokemon is to help children triumph over life's force by desensitization, which is why it normalizes a gladiatorial slave culture. Pokemon is pretty messed up, if you think about it. Got to catch 'em all slavers see to accumulate small beings to live in their cells, taking them out to fight on command. Would you want to live under a trainer in this sort of world? A loving relationship between Ash and Pikachu shows that it isn't just Stockholm Syndrome, though. The message is that a strong, positive spirit can triumph over a soulless system, which also seems to be the pedagogical lesson. The Shining miniseries. The Shining miniseries is a movie based on a true story that exists within the Stephen King multiverse. The Shining miniseries isn't as good as the original, but I have a theory on it. When Danny and Wendy escaped the hotel from the original movie, they might have told people what they experienced. One of those people might have been a movie producer that heard about the story and turned it into a movie, which means characters from like Salem's Lot, It's Pet Cemetery, Firesticker, and many more get to go to the theaters and watch the movie. Another example is the tone of the movie. It's downright goofy, and it's not that even scary. And the actors look like they're really actors in the Stephen King multiverse. It is more talking in the show than there is something scary too. It might be far-fetched, but it's just a theory. Gravity Falls attracts weirdness in part because of a hallucinogenic environment. Okay, so anybody who has seen Gravity Falls knows that town is genuinely strange, and it's explained that there's a natural weirdness, magnetism to the town. Strange things just happen there. But while there are a lot of theories, some proposed within the show and also many by fans. But what I don't think has been suggested for a root cause of the weirdness is literally that, roots, or rather, mycelium. Mycelium are the closest thing a fungus has to functioning root systems, and its main job is to stretch out and absorb nutrients. Now anybody can tell you that the damp, heavily forested country of northern Oregon, where Gravity Falls takes place, is ideal growing conditions for a number of mushrooms. Especially, as you can see in just about any episode of the show. Seriously, just look at Gravity Falls mushrooms, the particular mushroom with the red cap and white spots. To some, that's just a stereotypical cartoon mushroom. But think of where you see them. They're typically associated with gnomes and fairies in pop culture, these red mushrooms. They are none other than Amanita muscaria, Amanitas are known for their psychoactive properties and especially that their use tends to lead to intense spiritual experiences and euphoria. After some admittedly uncomfortable possible vomit tripping and or lapses in consciousness, I've tried them. I think the town of Gravity Falls is built on a massive, ancient, self-sustaining colony of Amanita muscaria that the Amanita mycelium have made their way into the water supply of the town, and that, since the days of Gravity Falls, early native inhabitants, those that lie by that valley, have been microdosing on a hallucinogen that makes you seem to have supernatural experiences. Does this make the supernatural weirdness in Gravity Falls any less real? Of course not. But the significantly more open instead of a constant background Amanita trip could cause their reality to thin and for things like Bill to infiltrate consciousness and add more weirdness into the mix. Anyway, giant fungal colonies aren't unheard of in Oregon. In fact, the largest organism on Earth is a 2-mile honey fungus in the Blue Mountains of Oregon. So there it is. GLDR Gravity Falls is weird because it's built on top of a giant hallucinogenic shroom colony, and part of how these strange experiences manifest is that they're tripping out. In Aladdin, Jafar was the good guy. The city of Agrabah was ruled by an uncaring monarch. The Sultan, who played with toys, clearly ate too much and lived in an extravagant palace. Meanwhile, his people were starving and lived in severe poverty, barely surviving as bandits, brothels, and beggars populated the streets. And the Sultan's naive, silver-spoon daughter thought she understood the people's lives after spending, like 2 hours outside. So, as the Grand Vizier, that's like a Prime Minister, Jafar got fed up and did the only thing he could to save his people, orchestrate a coup d'etat to seize power from the ineffective Sultan. Sadly, his plans were foiled by the selfish Aladdin. Aladdin was a self-admitted thief and con man who stole from poor people. He only cared about himself. He got 3 wishes and used them to become a fake prince in order to hit on the only rich girl in town, save his life from a jam he got himself into, and then free the genie, probably in the hopes of having an all-powerful ally. What did he do for his people? Nothing. Jafar did everything he could to save Agrabah, but in the end, Aladdin prevailed, moved into the palace with the princess, and the Sultan continued ignoring his starving populace. The entire animated movie we saw was told by the genie to paint Aladdin and himself in the best and most sympathetic light. Revisionist history at its best. Jafar was the good guy. Why the Green Ranger seemed more powerful when working with Rita and weaker when he joined the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. This is before the green candle came into play, and why the Green Ranger seemed like the marauder from Doom Eternal when fighting the Rangers. The basic idea is that the 5 Rangers share a combined force of power from the morphing grid and split it into 5 pieces every time they call out their dinosaur when morphing. Since the Green Ranger is essentially on his own, his power is that of equal to the 5 Rangers, if not greater put together, since he has no power to share/divide, and is able to remain the powerhouse that he was during his initial confrontation with the Rangers. Also, since the Sword of Darkness in theory helps hold that power without dividing it once the Rangers beat him and he joins them, his power is added to the overall power of the 5 Rangers, and then becomes divided into 6 pieces for the now 6 Rangers, hence why he is now required to yell out dragons or to morph. Further evidence can be viewed as after the Rangers have the Green Ranger on their side, it becomes harder to beat normal monsters whenever the Green Ranger is MIA, since all their powers are now at 1/6 individually, and only being at 5/6 altogether without the Green Ranger. For example, South Africa has a nuclear bomb, the U.S. and Mexico fighting against rebel space weapons misfiring into California and killing 2 former presidents. The Amazon rainforest becoming irradiated from a nuclear meltdown. They reference losing the ozone layer and needing sunblock 5000. We have a society which has destroyed itself and is on the verge of going too far into chaos for things to be fixed. It's a global society which is craving order, and they are willing to do desperate things to get it. That's the very reason RoboCop was created in the first place. The Detroit police in RoboCop were underpaid, killed daily, and had become a hollow and empty institution. Instead of fixing the system so cops could do a better job, Oz literally brought a corpse back to life that they didn't have to pay and couldn't be killed to ignore the real problem. Humanity is actively ignoring their own worst traits and building society around those traits. Everything in the RoboCop universe falls into a theme of society being blind to its own terrible qualities. This results in them applying a solution which takes a problem and simultaneously make it better and worse. Order and efficiency are valued above humanity with. That's the Terran Federation. What is the evidence for this that we can actually see in the films? Let us start with the culture. In RoboCop, men and women share a locker room. NSFW, the space is no longer considered taboo for men and women to share. That's a really big sign right there that RoboCop is a precursor to the culture of the Terran Federation, because what happens in Starship Troopers? You guessed it. NSFW men and women share showers in boot camp. NSFW This is a sign that whatever culture developed in Robocop held over in the world of the Terran Federation media is another example of this. Throughout Robocop we have OCP-funded television pumping out propaganda onto the masses. This is essentially the way they get people to think of OCP as being this beneficial force for Detroit. This type of media is mirrored in the Terran Federation propaganda materials we see throughout Starship Troopers. Talk politics in Robocop. There is this active pressure by OCP to remove the rights of the individual and hand it over to a new power. OCP actually pushed for the company to act as a central political control over Detroit as it transitioned into Delta City. Their flags were draped throughout the city, and the CEO of the company is quoted as saying that City Hall was a decaying symbol of mismanagement and corruption. They refer to themselves as the new seat of power and fresh start for society. The housing is described as every citizen will have a unite, safe, secure, clean in Starship Troopers. This mentality is expressed in what seems like a society that took it to full fruition. Their government is based around citizens who are all subservient to the central military authority. Citizens are required to serve if they want to gain full rights within their society, which means they've essentially scrapped democracy as a concept. We see this exchange go down in the classroom scene. The professor is describing the failure of democracy and how after the takeover they established an order which has created an everlasting peace ever since. In Robocop, the public police gets privatized into a military-like force at a later point and reformed into urban rehabilitators. OCP decided to trade off public employees with those who would be incorporated directly into the system to help with evictions. The urban rehabilitators are in charge of destroying the old system to rebuild the new system. This is what I believe went down in the Robocop universe. I believe that OCP and the urban rehabilitators were a proto-form of the Terran Federation which ended up taking over. While it can be debated whether OCP is the precursor to Terran Federation or if the Terran government is a similar entity with the same idea, the reality is they likely exist in the same universe. OCP was unsuccessful in the film. The power vacuum that was left in society called for a new centralized force to maintain order and security at a time when neither were guaranteed. The Terran Federation took all of humanity's worst aspects and they groomed them into a military-style control mechanism. Under this authoritarian system of control, the mistakes that we see in the Robocop movies can never occur again, because the state holds absolute control over the individual. Stylistically, we can see that there isn't a huge shift in the way these entities look. This is the urban rehabilitator uniform. This is Terran Federation uniform. Even when we look at artificial limbs in this universe, we're seeing the echoes of AUK technology which likely got reincorporated into the new global state. Robocop's arm, look at the hand. Terran Federation artificial limb is a stretch. I don't believe it's as much of a stretch as other fan theories. I actually think both the style and the culture displayed in both films creates a strong reason to suspect they are from the same universe. It takes place in the same universe as American Gods, and Pennywise is an old god. I think if the entity living below Derry, Maine, that takes the form of Pennywise is an old god in the same world as American Gods. Why American God book spoilers? There's precedent within American Gods to support the idea Hinslman controls Lakeside in a very similar manner to how it controls Derry. All the adults are in this complacent mode of not ever looking too deep into what's going on. In Hinslman's case, he sacrifices a child once a year. In its case, it consumes several children every 27 years, and then causes a natural disaster that kills more. It feeds on fear, and is something of a trickster gut. There are several gods in American Gods that do similar or even worse than Pennywise. Another connection, in American Gods, Shadow has a dream about the Hall of Forgotten Gods. One of them is an octopus-faced god, evidently Excel, who reference, which Stephen King also does, connecting both worlds to the Lovecraft mythos to some degree, even though that connection is more tongue-in-cheek than anything else. Pokemon Pokeballs are used as a conservation method. There are a lot of Pokemon. The lists seem to grow year after year, but there are also a lot of each Pokemon. Like in real life, Pokemon take the place of animals. But in Pokemon, they don't do the things we do to curb or develop animals for use. We make leathers and eat animals, and we hunt. Pokemon hunters are considered evil. The only act of consuming a Pokemon I can recall is from Slowpoke Tales, which was considered taboo in the game. With no methods of controlling Pokemon population as well as the use they provide to human society, the numbers should increase exponentially. But they don't. Why? Pokeballs and storage PCS. A fantastic, safe, humane way of controlling population. While inside the Pokeball they don't seem to need to eat, and are comfortable. It's the perfect way to keep the streets with humans and not overrun. It's possible they were even developed after the Great Pokemon War we have hints of. Further evidence, a lot of people don't use Pokeballs. In the Detective Pikachu movie we see them walking around everywhere. In towns in the game they accompany the NPCs and can be seen helping around. And it makes sense, if these are supposed to be friends, why keep them in cages? Why does anyone besides a trainer need the balls to carry more than one Pokemon? Because that's how we keep the numbers manageable. Super Mario 64 Peach is Bowser. The villain of the game is actually Peach and not Bowser. This might be surprising, because it seems obvious that Bowser is the villain. However, my theory is that Peach used the star power to assume the form of Bowser. Consider this, what are the in-game effects of wielding the star power? First and foremost is the ability to change shape and warp reality, as seen with various bosses given portions of the star power. There's also the ability to speak to Mario telepathically without being physically present. Obviously, these both apply to Bowser. Let's see how they apply to Peach. Does she change shape/warp reality? Well, yes. At the end of the game, she appears floating outside the castle. How does she appear? The star taken from Bowser transforms into Peach. We're led to believe that Bowser locked Peach up somehow and that the star power is the key to release her. But what if Bowser being defeated was just Peach transforming into the star form and then back into Peach? That's not conclusive evidence, but I have more point. There's also the matter of telepathic speech. Obviously, Bowser can do this, but what about other characters? There are a few others. For one, Big Boo's haunt includes telepathic speech, presumably from the Boo or Boos that had stars. There are occasional instructional pop-ups in various worlds, which could just be from Lakitu himself. However, there's one other character that speaks telepathically, Peach. At various points in the game, such as Peach's secret slide, Peach communicates telepathically to Mario, a power that seems to be reserved for wielders of star power. So it seems plausible that Peach could have been using the star power, but we'll need a little more evidence to prove that she did. My next piece of evidence is the note at the beginning of the game, which says, "Dear Mario, please come to the castle. I baked a cake for you. Yours truly, Princess Toadstool." Based on the timing and context of how this is displayed, it's assumed that it was sent and delivered shortly before the intro cutscene, and that Mario left immediately for Peach's castle. We know this because it says she already baked the cake, which she would then say if the letter would take days to deliver. It almost reads like a text message in terms of its timing. There are a couple problems with this. If Peach's letter is to be believed, then in the short interval between the letter being sent and Mario's arrival, Bowser arrived at the castle, overtook the entire thing, found where the star power was hidden, used the star power to bring most of the paintings to life, entered the paintings to give stars to bosses and hide the rest, created various traps in the castle, and still had time to greet Mario at the door. That seems suspiciously like it would take a long time. I'll get back to that in a moment, but there's another problem with the letter, the cake. Peach had said she baked a cake for us, yet the cake is nowhere to be found in the castle. Even when we rescue Peach, she tells us that she's going to bake a cake for us, and since she hasn't even baked it yet. This confirms that at the very least, the cake is a lie. There was never any cake waiting for us at the castle. So why did she say there was? This brings me to the part where I tie it all together. Peach was bored and wanted some adventure, so she used the star power to transform into Bowser and bring all those worlds to life. Then, after visiting each one and giving some extra star power to the bosses, she wanted even more adventure. That's when she sent a letter to Mario promising cake if he comes to the castle. She lied to him to get him to come to the castle and play along with her game. She wanted another adventure so much that she deliberately set up a crisis for Mario to rescue her from. Peach played the whole thing off as if Bowser captured her when she was behind it all. At least she followed through with the cake. Halloween is a different killer reenacting the horrific event on Halloween. I was kind of confused when Michael kept on getting resurrected from the dead every movie. I mean, I understand Jason coming back because he's immortal. But how does Michael keep on coming back? Well, I thought of something that I know will solve my problems. It's a different killer. Every Halloween a killer dresses up as Michael and goes to Haddonfield to reenact the massacre that Michael started. That makes Michael an icon to psychopaths in the movies. Now granted, in H20 sequel Resurrection it was some random guy that Laurie chopped off his head, but it could have been a killer. Another thing is that the masks are very different every movie. I mean, if it was Michael every movie he would have used the same mask. I might be reading too much into it, but it's just a theory. Friday the 13th, Part 4 through 6, Secret Connection. Go easy on me, it's been a while since I've seen these movies. I was recently going through a Friday the 13th forum and found a topic that interested me. Did Jason kill Megan's mom? After doing some research, I think that Sheriff Mike Garris might be Tommy Jarvis's father. Hear me out. According to the Friday the 13th timeline, Trish Jarvis was born in 1968. That would have made Mama Jarvis 26 and Sheriff Garrett 20, left parentheses according to their actors' bios, which makes sense if you consider he left after Tommy was conceived, because he either didn't love her or wasn't ready to fully settle down. This also explains Tommy's brownish hair and the fact he doesn't really talk about him much, while Trish is told about a phone call from him. There are a couple things that don't really work. 1. Megan being born sometime within a 2-year span of Tommy. 2. Tommy's father already existing with the name of Malcolm Jarvis. 3. Garrett antagonizing Tommy for most of Jason Lives. My guess is 4. Maybe he actually loved the mother this time, or he was finally ready. 5. Garrett probably could have changed his name after the events of 2. 4. To distance himself from the family or the media. Or the town's tourism board asked him to help people forget about Jason. They did change the name from Crystal Lake to Forest Green. 6. Garrett probably knew that Tommy was a part of his past he never wanted anyone to find out about. That's why he decided just to escort him out of town instead of keeping him in the jail where the other officers could find him. Finally, most members of both families do share similar facial features, mainly the jaw. What do you guys think of this theory? Also, I'm aware that would mean Megan and Tommy would be related, which could be why Garrett tells Megan to get away from him. C. Scott Pilgrim. Ramona is the real villain. In Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Scott has to choose between two lovers. Knights who loved everything he loved but was 1 year too young at most. They never said when her birthday was, in Ramona, who was rather uninterested and had psycho exes she decided not to warn him about. The lack of interest in Scott is the first of the oddities, but by no means the last. Superpowers caught people by surprise, and no one seemed to know they were real, but everyone Ramona dated them, and Scott developed them after meeting her. Also, after meeting Ramona and her exes, Scott learned to kill without remorse. No one ever returns after being converted to coins. Finally, Ramona leads Scott away from everything he loves: the band, the video games, his friends, etc. Everything except her. So now Scott has Ramona as his only emotional tie, no issues killing people, and a lover who seems disinterested in him. The perfect setup to make Scott the next evil ex. Note: I have not read the comics, I just saw and enjoyed the movie. I just disliked him choosing Ramona, as she was, well, everything I said before. Fairly Odd Parents. Timmy and Cosmo, Wanda and Trixie are one and the same. Wow, another Fairly Odd Parents theory. I can't believe I haven't thought of this before. To quote Wacko Warner, here goes part 1. Cosmo. Firstly, Timmy and Cosmo have the exact same hairstyle and seem to be the only characters who have that hairstyle. Secondly, Timmy and Cosmo, when you think about it, have rather similar personalities. Just Cosmo is ramped up to the maximum. My idea is that Timmy became Cosmo after he died, and after years of training, got Georgian to send him into the past for him and wanted to become the godparent of Cosmo's past self, the miserable Timmy Turner. Part 2. Wanda. Another thing I noticed is that Trixie Tang, Timmy's love interest, and Wanda also have similar hairstyles and have somewhat similar personalities, both being overall nice people and all. Part 3 conclusion. Basically, my theory states that Timmy and Trixie married after growing up, backed up by channel chasers, with Timmy's kids having the same hair color as Trixie, and when they died, became Cosmo and Wanda. Jason in Friday the 13th and other slasher villains murder sexually active teenagers. I've been marathoning the Friday the 13th films lately, and I've come to realize that it's possible that the consistent trope of Jason murdering promiscuous teenagers is not because of the filmmakers punishing sexually immoral teenagers, but because it effectively immersed the teenage audience. Primarily this could be because teenagers are likely to go to an entertaining yet trivial film where they would find it easy to make out whilst occasionally tuning into witness mindless entertainment that didn't require any substantial attentiveness. This would be the perfect audience to therefore project the vulnerabilities of the film characters onto. Imagine you literally embody the trope of an 80s teenage couple exploring their sexuality, sitting in the movie theater, making out, when suddenly the 80s teenage couple exploring their sexuality on screen get brutally murdered. Frequently, people cite these films as symbolic of the socially conservative political tone of the time period, effectively advocating for a world where sexually immoral youth get the fucking shit murdered out of them for relenting to their natural urges. And sure, there's definitely an aspect of that, especially as the final girl trope is so persistent, such as in Nightmare on Elm Street when the final girl explicitly denies Johnny Depp sex and lives, whereas her friend dies directly after having sex. But perhaps it's not as much a sexual shaming subtext as much as it's a technique to troll the audience, to leave a lasting impression, and to keep them coming back for more. Not only are these teenagers being naughty, but they're also watching mature films and integrating a bit of danger into their newfound sex lives. Perhaps the films are not even shaming sex at all, but simply using the unstoppable reality of teenage sex to make us urify a franchise that would be endlessly popular with the youth. Edit. Started watching part 4 the final chapter and it might have wrecked the whole theory, because it's immediately an overt attempt to scare kids out of having sex. There's the slut trope that has a lengthy discussing with the obvious final girl about having sex with multiple boys, and the punk telling his nerdy friend to practice with different girls every time. Especially topical, as it was released during the AIDS epidemic during the Reagan presidency. Transformers Friday the 13th. This particular fan theory of mine is based on statements that Michael Bay has confirmed. However, I've decided to carry on with it and would love opinions. In the first installment of Transformers, directed and co-produced by Michael Bay, there is a character named Trent. Trent is a high school quarterback and possesses the common generic "I'm the star of the team and I'm better than anyone here" attitude. In 2009, a reboot of Friday the 13th was released. This movie was also produced by Michael Bay. Trent, who possessed the same asshole attitude, is a major character and is considered a tertiary antagonist. In fact, the character is even portrayed by the same actor Travis Van Winkle as in Transformers. Michael Bay confirmed that these characters are actually the same person. Here's where my theory kicks in. Clearly, due to Bay's confirmation, these two very different movies take place in the same universe. Could there potentially be a Transformers Friday the 13th crossover? If so, how would the situation play out? There are quite a few varieties of Jason Voorhees. The first that comes to mind is Jason X, who is essentially made of metal, making him a potential enemy against Autobots. A good theory is for Decepticons to somehow acquire Jason X's aid and bring the battle to the Autobots. Are there any other opinions on this topic? In the Emperor's New Groove, Patch and Kezco were kind of the bad guys. Observe the characteristics of Patch and Kezco attempting to maintain a harmful status quo. We open on Kezco, the self-confessed selfish, spoiled brat who throws someone out a window for interrupting his theme song. We're told that Kezco has changed, but the voiceover, presumably from some future self, is still focused on Kezco and only Kezco. We know from the first few scenes that the poor in this kingdom are extremely poor and mistreated. Note the peasant from the throne room who is unceremoniously thrown out after asking for food. We then discover Patch's interest in keeping Kezco in power. Patch is introduced as the village leader, which means that he is basically middle management. He's the guy who keeps Kezco in power while living off the backs of those below him. And if you think that the bottom is an idyllic place where you work hard and are rewarded, think again. Remember the peasant with no food? Yes, indeed. Patch is benefiting fully and completely from this British Empire-style monarchy that sees people getting their land and possessions confiscated freely. We don't really see Patch carrying much until his own home is impacted. Yzma is our catalyst for change. She represents a Bolshevik-esque force that doesn't want to implement communism, but instead would prefer a military coup situation that would see her in power with no questions asked. Her revolution takes the form of poison, but she is the only symbol in the film that shows us the true inherent value of the patriarchy. When she accidentally turns Kezco into a llama, she is showing us that the only way to defeat the power of the people is to become even more entrenched in the patriarchy. Llamas are a major resource that keeps Kezco empowered, as they provide a source of revenue and goods. The only way for Kezco to be restored to his patriarchal figurehead role is to entrench deeper into the structure to which he clings. Even worse, Patch. The entire film is spent with Patch convincing Kezco that he cannot survive without middle management. The working class represent obstacles. For example, in the restaurant scene, Kuzco has to conceal his identity as a llama in order to obtain food. Pacha, as a supposedly beloved figure in the region, should been able to get food for his livestock on a long journey, but we see him ordering as if he's a regular and having to address Kuzco as a fake spouse. In the end, after Kuzco supposedly changes, only Pacha and Kuzco benefit from this big transformation. The status quo remains unchanged. Night, Deadly Night. The first three films are based on actual events in universe, and the fourth and fifth movies are just movies. The first film occurs, as normally, with Billy Chapman having his parents killed by a fake Santa Claus and being an orphan and similarly abused by a nun. The fact that he was committing mass murder while wearing a Santa Claus suit goes wild and many hear about it. After he's killed, the news continues to run the story as much as they can. It becomes so big a film is set into production. From here a film is finally finished and people come to see the movie in droves, and a relative of the killer sees his brother's killings be exploited. In the second film, the first film is playing in the theater. This is due to Hollywood finding out about the events in the universe and trying to make money off of it. While it's possible Ricky Caldwell, the brother of Billy Chapman, the killer from the first movie, could be a crazed individual who pretended to be the brother and be a copycat of the original killer, he too goes on his own murder spree, which equally gets attention. After he's taken down, what happened afterwards is when Hollywood begins to fictionalize actual things that happened in the SNDN universe. While Ricky may have escaped the hospital from a coma, it wasn't because of powers from a physic girl. From here the third movie becomes more fictional to the point where things are out of hands and the films start going goofy. This is where the fourth and fifth movies stand. Ricky, after either being mentally cured or from prison, starts suing the company, profiting from his and his brother's story, and so more factious films are made. But as a middle finger to Ricky, they still have a character called Ricky in both movies. The fourth film features the third film on TV being played, and the fifth film may have connections to the fourth one. From here the films stop, as both brothers are long gone, and the films in the SNDN universe are referred to as urban legends. They are typically discredited due to the latter three films having a bunch of science-fictional plots that make everyone believe that the whole series was just made up. Ralph Ludwig's Arcade is a money laundering front. There's no way this place runs on its own merits. For one, it's an arcade in the modern era. This place doesn't have the upgrades that Dave & Buster's has. It's straight from the 80s Ethmo upgrades. And we know it's the modern era, as smartphones, social media exist, and genocide is in the dead part of the internet. But even leaving aside how an arcade manages to survive in the modern era, we get an objective view of his apparent business, and business is not good. He won't spend $200 on Sugar Rush, because that's supposedly more than the game makes in a whole year. Wait. What, $200 a year? So there looks to be about 20 to 30 games in the arcade. Assuming Sugar Rush isn't an exceptionally unpopular game and is about average $200 per game, and about 30 games, 30 times 200 equals $6,000. Less than $6,000 for all the games in the arcade combined. Even accounting for snacks and stuff, that's barely enough to cover expenses, let alone feed Litwick. Yet, no. This company is clearly a money laundering business. He refuses to buy the new part because he doesn't really care about the business, and also appearances must be kept. He's supposed to be a struggling arcade owner. He can't be shelling out hundreds for an old part. It would blow his cover. Gravity Falls Dipper is the Rick, and Mabel is the Morty, so in Rick and Morty, there are infinite universes, each with their own Rick and Morty. So the one universal thing is that there is one smart and one dumb character. It is already confirmed that Rick and Morty and Gravity Falls will cross universes. Dipper is clearly the smarter one, and Mabel is less intelligent than Dipper, which leads me to believe that Dipper is the Rick, and Mabel is the Morty. Simpsons Leonard Nimoy probably didn't really get beamed up, so toward the end of season 4 episode 12 of The Simpsons, Marge vs. the Monorail, this scene occurs. Basically, Leonard Nimoy expresses satisfaction with the way he apparently resolved the issue of the out-of-control monorail before somehow being beamed up like his character in Star Trek. I was thinking about how it was strange that Barney, the town drunk, was the one chosen by the writers to counter Nimoy's statement by saying he didn't actually do anything. In later seasons, the role of contrarian in these kinds of scenes is usually played by Apple, a smarter and more opinionated character with the mental acuity to back up his assertions. So it seems weird that Barney of all characters is the one questioning Nimoy here. Well, my theory is that having Nimoy disappearing into thin air was almost too crazy for The Simpsons at this point, who were already beginning to push the boundaries of realism with some of their storylines. For the scene they needed an unreliable witness who could offset its extraordinary nature. Who better than the town drunk, who chugs varnish and hallucinates make-believe elephants, to fulfill this role? TLDR, Barney probably hallucinated Leonard Nimoy being beamed up. If not, he was the only one who saw it, and therefore no one would believe it. The Hedgehog series, Dr. Eggman lets Sonic win. Dr. Eggman has an IQ of 300. However, for a man with an intelligence off the charts, he seems to come up with some rather lacking plans. Other geniuses in the series, for example, Tails, think very little of his inventions and plans for global dominance. Even Metal Sonic, his own creation, think very little of him at times. However, what if that is exactly what Eggman wants the world to think, so he can successfully blindside the world when he puts his plan into action? By constantly making himself lose to Sonic, each defeat would cause Sonic to look at him as less of a threat and take him less seriously as a result. This is actually very supportive in the games. Starting from the very first game, as the first boss of the game has Eggman slowly going from side to side with a wrecking ball, making no clear attempts to stop Sonic. Even in subsequent games, it's clear Eggman is trying to let Sonic win. For further evidence, look at Sonic Adventure. At the beginning of that game, Eggman clearly knows a fair bit about chaos. Given Eggman's intelligence and knowledge of chaos at the beginning of the game, it would be very fair to say that he knew chaos would rebel against him if at full power, which is exactly what Eggman helps chaos achieve. Even Metal Sonic, which is widely accepted as his greatest creation, has rebelled against him. Given Eggman's vast knowledge of robotics, you would think that, if a robot had the capability to revolt, that he would know about it and have the means to eliminate the possibility, and since he didn't, he clearly wants it to have that capability there, there is even the possibility that Metal Sonic doesn't actually have the capability to revolt, and the times we see it do so were staged by Eggman himself, as it's been shown he's capable of remotely controlling Metal Sonic rivals to the idea of staging revolts or allowing a robot to revolt would help Eggman achieve his grand plan, since it would be incredibly hard to take somebody seriously if they can't keep their own forces in line. Which is exactly what Eggman wants. Since nobody takes Eggman seriously, it would be much easier for him to blindside the world and achieve his overall goal. Willy Wonka is a devil worshipper. I don't know if similar theories have been posted before, but today we'll look at it from an Islamic perspective. Yesterday I watched the original Wonka movie for the first time, and I'm convinced that Wonka made a deal with the devil. Here's why. One, he's referred to as the magician. I know a reporter said this in the movie and could not have known himself, but the movie's writers could have used a number of other words to describe him. By magic, I don't mean tricks that you see on TV. A magician is someone who is in contact with the world of jinn, devil, spirits, etc., and does unusual things with their help. In Islam, this is a very serious sin and is considered selling your soul. It's not a very convincing evidence, so let's look at other ones. 2UMPA-LUMPA equals JINNA. Jinn is a sentient being made of energy that exists in this world, but we cannot see it. Like electromagnetic waves, it can stay hidden or take many physical forms. Limit not known. They have a world and society just like humans and also have ranks. My theory is that Oompa Loompas are indeed from this race. This explains 1. Why the factory is closed, because Wonka doesn't want everyone to know, and jinn usually live in secluded areas. 2. The unusual interior of the factory. 3. Amazing innovative products and the site. And a number of other things. Don't remember now. They don't work for free for a human, and they don't do it for money either. They do it for fun. Let me explain. The jinn, especially their boss, the devil, feel inferior to humans, so they offer their services in exchange for humiliating acts from humans. Draw this pentagram, prostrate, go mix this disgusting thing in this, then drink them, etc. But you see that in the movie Wonka has control over them and they are scared of him, and this doesn't fit the Islamic description. Or does it? Remember, the jinn have ranks. This means that some of them have more power over the others, and Wonka could have made a deal with the higher ones and borrowed their slaves for himself. Wonka says that he saved the Oompas from some kind of creature that is either alive or explaining where they came from, or his way of saying that he treats them much better than the original masters. This part may be a little too far-fetched, but here it is. The service that the jinn is providing is very great, so it also requires greater sacrifices. Children. 3. Wonka's unusual behavior. You may say it's a kid's movie, so it needs to be something to entertain and capture the attention, and that's definitely true, but there are some things that stand out. Wonka spelling things backwards. I only caught one, but nevertheless this is a classic one, and you know the reason behind it. Also, the boat scene screams literally evil. Oh, and the supernatural trip on that boat was the jinn bewitching their eyes. For music, there is a direct relationship between music and magic. You definitely have heard selling their souls. But why another characteristic of jinn is that they are very eloquent and very skilled with words. This is why Prophet Muhammad said some form of speech is magic. In the movie you can see the Oompas and Wonka making up rhyming words on the flight and captivating their audience with words. Ed, Edded, and Eddie. The reason you never see any of the parents or any other children is because the Eds don't remember what they'll look like at the end of season 4. An episode Take This Ed and Shove It shows that every previous episode is just the Eds in their old age reminiscing about their adventures during their childhoods as a way to keep their memory sharp and to just generally pass the time. Personally, I hate this idea the series went with and prefer it didn't happen. Regardless, it does open up something sort of insightful and slightly depressing. There's a brief scene that shows all the other children from the series as old people as well. My theory is that the reason you only ever see a handful of kids in the show is because the stories the Eds tell each other only includes the childhood version of their neighbors who are still alive. This is because they can't remember anyone else. Let's say old man Kevin dies, then the rest of the stories they tell don't include him because he'll slowly be erased from their memories. This is also why we never see their parents. Of course the Eds know that they had parents, but they've been dead for so long that they just can't remember what they look like. Stephen King's cinematic universe SKCU. This has been a big part in Stephen King's books for a while now, but I'll give it to you straight. Every Stephen King story is connected into a larger multiverse, and the Dark Tower series is the web that holds it together, and I think, with the boom of Stephen King movie adaptations, that these movies will follow the same path now. I'm not too certain with which movies are canon, but the movies that I think are taking place in the same world are The Shining 1980 at Chapter 1, 2017 at Chapter 2, 2019, The Dark Tower 2017, Doctor Sleep 2019, One-Liners, and the novel of it. All the members of the Losers Club have the ability to shine. That's how they defeat Pennywise. Now, Chapter 2 can change elements from the book, although I think it would be a cool reveal. But in the Dark Tower movie, there is a circus that has the name Pennywise on it. Pennywise, in the book, has a lot of connections to the Dark Tower books, such as characters like the Turtle of Life. This could possibly be where he got the idea of the clown and name being his main form that he uses, and in the Dark Tower movie, the main kid character is revealed to be a shiner as well, which could also mean that the Dark Tower is set in the same world as The Shining, which of course will have a sequel, Doctor Sleep. Marvel is making money. Cinematic universes are popular now. Two little things in the Dark Tower, we saw references to other King stories. For example, a picture of the Overlook Hotel is seen in an office. Also, the book Misery's Child is seen in the movie, which could also mean that Misery is canon as well. In the Chapter 1, Mike encounters Pennywise in the form of a burning building with people inside it. In the original book, that burning building was an African American party that got burned down. Mike survived the incident, but another survivor was Dick Halloran, who also was a character in The Shining. Although those timelines don't exactly sync up with one another, so this might not carry into the movies. But since Chapter 2 and Doctor Sleep are released quite close to one another, I have a feeling that some of the events in the two will be mentioned in Doctor Sleep. Also, there's a little Easter egg to the Dark Tower. When Bill is going down to the basement and encounters Pennywise, in his hand is a Lego turtle, the reference to Pennywise's arch-nemesis, the Turtle of Life, further suggesting that the cinematic version of Pennywise is more connected to the Dark Tower Studios. Most of the films listed here are owned by Warner Bros., which includes The Shining, the It movies, and Doctor Sleep, so the likely of a crossover. or even just a certain character appearing in a different movie is possible, and from what I gathered, the upcoming series The Stand is also a WB property, and I'm pretty sure the upcoming adaptations of The Talisman and Revival will also be helmed by WB. In conclusion, this all sounds really insane, but I think that a cinematic version of King's Multiverse does have some potential, and I don't think film producers want to miss out on an idea like this, especially the perfect timing right now, where Marvel is making lots of money with its movies and the boom of Stephen King adaptations gaining more popularity. And Metro Men aren't the only aliens. Outright so. I watched the movie just a few months ago. In fact, I watched it 3 times in total, but I don't remember every line word for word, so apologies if this was actually mentioned, but during the movie, nobody seems bothered by the fact that Megamind and Metro Man are clearly not humans. While Metro Man looks identical to a human, he had no secret identity and showed off his super strength and flying ability. To all the kids in school, everyone clearly knows who he is and what he does, and yet, they just can't roll with it. As for Megamind, nobody questions the fact that he has blue skin or a giant head. People just roll with it. Of course, they treated him different from Metro Man, but for reasons that have nothing to do with his appearance. This is my theory. Superpowered aliens like Megamind and Metro Man are nothing new. Pretty much everyone knows that they exist, and they just kinda expected later in the movie, when Hal the cameraman became Titan, everyone was willing to leave the city, and Titan pretty much dominated the entire city, carving his name into a street block. If Titan was basically Superman, couldn't he have just kept going to other cities to cause chaos, until he eventually had domination over the entire world? No, he couldn't have, because he might have encountered another superhuman in another city that could have defeated him. Of course, he had no reason to dominate the entire world, because all he ever wanted was Roxanne, but there's still the possibility that he could have, if he wanted to. In fact, if Metro Man wanted to stop becoming a hero, why didn't he just move to another city to completely hide his identity? Perhaps he didn't, because it would have been too risky if he encountered another superhero. And yes, I know Hal's super name is technically Titan, but fuck that. Game's enemies have an incentive to kill the player. I was watching a playthrough of The Last of Us 1 today, and letting my mind wander on the yellow brick roads it goes on. As I did that, the player I watched died and the game reset to the last checkpoint, starting the whole encounter over. This triggered a thought: if these enemies were sentient, what would be the incentive to kill the character? If you want to go further to incorporate all games, what would be the incentive to cause the player to get a game over? If they were the same goons or bosses that constantly showed up after every checkpoint restart, that would be hell, wouldn't it? You would be living the same scenario over and over for the rest of your life. You may even be killed in your encounter with the player, only to be reborn so the whole scenario can start again. I imagine madness would kick in pretty quickly. But what if there was a catch that motivated the enemies to be driven to complete their objective? What could they gain that would drive them so badly to kill the player? There seems to be only one reward: freedom. What if the enemies in the game are sentient beings who are fighting for the freedom of their souls? What if the reward is that once the player dies, you and your companions who lived the encounter are free from the game and your soul drifts into the cosmos? Let's say you're in a certain zone, say in The Last of Us, in a sewer with biters and clickers. Say you're overwhelmed and a clicker fucking brutal enemies. BTW gets the drop on you and takes a chunk out of your neck. For you, the screen cuts to black as the checkpoint reloads. But for the enemies who are still alive, they have sweet, satisfying release and no longer have to fight. They are free from the burdens of control and float away into paradise. That would mean we would need to get all Doctor Strange and consider alternate timelines. These enemies you encounter again may look the same, but are actually different souls there to be tested. A new timeline of a similar scenario. These souls have luck of the draw with their bodies same as us and the lives we are born into, and some either make it or don't. But they all want to be free, so they will stop at nothing to kill you. To take this a step further, I thought about bosses, the enemies with their own unique area, abilities, and armor. They are extremely hard to kill and require specific steps to taking them out. My mind jumps to Kingdom Hearts and how intensively nerve-wracking those boss battles are. But in regards to the theory, what if they were different souls? I've considered that maybe they just got extra lucky with their placement, but that seems too simple. Instead, I thought they are the souls of enemies who have lived through a game over and have chosen to stay in the game. They are the lost souls who do not want to leave the cage they've gotten so comfortable in. It may be hell, but it is familiar hell, and that motivates them to stay, because the unknown is scary. Because of this, they are rewarded with enhanced abilities, extra health, and even stronger attacks that kill you in 2 to 3 hits. I am looking at you, Ansem, yet it is still hell, and they're trapped there until you kill them. Maybe that's an extra incentive for you to beat the boss. Reach into your humanity. I'm curious to know your guys' thoughts on this theory. What are some ways it makes sense or doesn't quite add up? Also, what games become way more intense if this is a reality? I doubt this will get major recognition, but thanks for allowing me to stretch my nerd brain a little. P.S. It seems like one would need to be high to get this deep into an overarching theory on video game souls, but this was all created in my sober mind. Nothing but fun theories at 1 in the morning. Popeye is allergic to spinach. His immediate symptoms upon consumption include swelling, aggression, hyperactivity, and grandiosity. The Shining Danny used his knowledge of Looney Tunes to escape his father. When we see Danny watching TV, it's always Looney Tunes, specifically the Bugs Bunny / Roadrunner show. His nickname is Doc, and Halloran does a Bugs Bunny impression when they first meet. Danny constantly cruises the hotel halls like the Roadrunner, thereby also showing he's in good shape for a kid. When Jack finally snaps, Danny puts all his exercise and cartoon knowledge into action. His evasion of his father is pure Looney Tunes style, like the Roadrunner versus the Coyote. He outsmarts his dad in a very cartoon way by covering his tracks, leaving him to die in a very slapstick way. We even get an aftermath shot of Jack frozen to death like an idiot, just like how the Coyote is often smashed flat or folded like an accordion in defeat. The Cat in the Hat is an escaped child molester. This book never sat well with me, I always felt like it was off and it doesn't have a particularly good ending. Then I realized, holy shit. So first of all, the cat doesn't have a name. Apparently his hat is so integral to him, it's his namesake. So let's focus on that for a second. His hat is striped, which makes me think of old Timmy striped prison outfits. The cat shows up uninvited to a stranger's house with his two pet feral children that he keeps in cages, thing 1 and 2, and encourages the kids to do things they're not supposed to do, like jumping on the bed and making a mess. When he's all done, he meticulously cleans up the house to hide the evidence and demands the children to never tell their parents about him. The fish in the story always struck me as odd. He's the voice of reason who never trusts the cat, but he doesn't win in the end. Throughout the book, the fish is ignored. The fish knows the cat is a creepy fucking dude who shouldn't be here, but he's physically unable to do anything about it, being a fish. What's the story even supposed to be about? Not to trust people, because the cat got his way. He won. It ends with, what would you do if your mother asked you? The whole thing is strange to me, and I never liked it.